Hello everybody! Happy Friday! It's Friday. Happy Friday! Happy Friday everybody! Happy end of the week. Happy Fire Friday with actual torches this time. Look, see? Torch. We are going to be doing embellished stepped bezel pendant. Hi Alice! And hi Keiko! Hi Lori! And I think I saw Irish Disney Nerd on there as well. So hi everybody! And and I get not being quite as enthused as that Pikachu Keiko, because that Pikachu was real excited, and I definitely, it's like, rah. It's about the amount of energy that I've got at this point. So, embellished stepped bezel pendant. So let's talk for a second about stepped bezel wire, alright? So stepped bezel wire is exactly what it sounds like, but it doesn't necessarily mean anything if you're not familiar with any of those terms. So bezel wire is what you would use to set a stone, like a cabochon gemstone. And stepped means that this wire, whenever I get it in focus, hello, focus. Oh, right, my focus is way down here because that's where I'm going to be working. So you can see it has a little ledge that's integrated into the wire. So when you are doing a basic bezel set pendant, and those who have seen that tutorial know this, for those of you who haven't seen that tutorial, you've got a flat sheet of metal, you've got a piece of very flexible wire called bezel wire, you solder the bezel wire down to the flat sheet, cut it out, put your stone in there, set your stone using the flexible bezel wire to roll over the top of your stone. So this kind of does two of those things in one. So instead of having a full back plate, it gives you just a little shelf that your stone will sit on. So if you are being budget conscious, this is great because you don't have to spend money on a whole sheet of silver or even copper to do your piece with. It's limited in its capacity because it's not very tall, and I'm actually, because I have someone I think I can sell it to next weekend, I'm actually going to be using this big fat Larimar, which is in 100% too tall for this bezel. So I'm going to cheat. I'm actually going to wind up gluing that Larimar into the bezel that I make. But again, the chance for money is currently trumping the need to completely hold to proper technique. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to form my bezel around my Larimar, and this is the part that can be kind of a pain in the butt because the bezel's kind of stiff. And so if you're using this stepped bezel, and you can buy this from all your major jewelry suppliers, Rio Grande carries it, I know, I'm sure Stellar carries it, and probably some people on Etsy. So if you're going to, bless you, if you're going to actually use the bezel itself to hold your stone, it is going to be, unless you're hammer setting, unless you have like a micro hammer or a hammer setting handpiece, it's going to be to your benefit to actually thin down with like a sanding disc this part of your bezel so that it can more easily turn over your stone, because this is awful thick. This is the thickness that you really would need a hammer set in order to make this work. So if you're going to actually use your bezel to set your stone, just take a sanding disc, ignore this little ledge, and just sand down this part here, the bigger part, that's your bezel, until it's probably about half the thickness that it is now. I'm not talking height, I'm talking like thickness here. So you're just going to sand that down. That's going to make your life a lot easier. Since I am faking it with this bezel and I'm actually going to glue my stone in, I don't need to do that. I'm going to just leave it as is because I'm not actually going to press my bezel over the stone. Like I said, I'm gonna pull a cheaty at the end of this, and I am going to yeah, so I'm gonna glue that in there. Well, and then in this particular instance I'm faking it because yeah, money. That's what I got. So I'm going to form my bezel around my stone, like so. There we go. So we do want a good tight fit, especially since I'm gluing it. We don't want any airspace happening. And so somehow I've managed to kind of come to a point at a corner. I do not recommend that. I want to join on one of my surfaces, probably what is going to be like the middle of either the top or the bottom. I haven't decided yet, because if you join at a corner, you're going to wind up with this like really awkward point, which is not going to give you a good result. Okay, so now I've got this formed around my Larimar, and now I'm going to hold these. I'm going to grab a marker, and I'm just going to mark across here so that I have a mark on everything. Okay, I can let that go, because you can see that sprang quite, oh fine, you go over there. It sprang open quite a lot when I let it go, so I luckily have my marks there and just barely here, so I know where to cut. I mean, faking it because money is totally valid in my opinion. It's how small businesses sometimes have to operate. Okay, so now I'm going to take my flush cutter and I'm going to cut at my marks. So I'm going to make sure that the flush cutting side of my cutters, which is the flat side, is towards what I'm going to be using. Put the rest of that wire aside. And then I'm going to go to my other cut line, which like I said is only this tiny little tick mark. I didn't really get that marked very well, but it's enough. So I'm going to take, again, the flush side of my cutters, so the flat side of my cutters are facing towards what's going to remain. So this is my waste that's coming out of the notched in side of my cutters. So snip that. And then I am going to have to employ the dreaded file just a little bit, because I do need these ends to line up and meet flush. And right now, because of the burrs from the cutting and the fact that I actually didn't cut one of these at a really great angle, they're not meeting. You can see the air or the light through them. So I'm just going to open them up. I'm just going to file just a little bit. Don't have to file a lot, but just to smooth out the burrs from the cutting. And then flip it over. The other side. I'm sorry. Need closer eyes for this. Okay, so that is pretty good. I think that'll work. Okay, so this is what we're going for. So what I'm going for here is to not have my broadcast window behind my ring light so I can't see anything. Yeah, so there we go. So that's my joint. So this is what we want. We want a joint where we can't see any light through it. That's not light, I promise, that's reflection. Reflected light, which is different. So this one's good to go. This one's good to solder. Y'all are funny. Okay, so now I'm going to solder this closed. So let's talk for just a second about solder densities. So you've got solder in different densities. Different densities means basically different amounts of silver in your solder. So sterling silver solder is a combination of silver and copper, which is the same thing that sterling silver is a combination of, and zinc. What the zinc does is it lowers the melting point of the solder down below the metal that you are actually soldering. So that's what allows this whole process to work, is that the solder is going to melt before the actual metal. If everything melted at the same time, you would just have a puddle of sad silver, and you would have a sad Allison, and everyone would be sad, and we don't want sadness on the stream. So in the interest of preventing sadness, we are going to use two different densities of solder, we think. Yes. 2 different densities of solder this evening. So, ooh, hold on. That's awesome, Irish Disney nerd.
That's
Yay.
so great.
Okay, so we're going to be using 2 densities of solder this evening. And the reason that there are different densities of solder in the first place is because if you're doing a piece with multiple joints, we are all by now probably familiar with the concept that metal conducts heat. So if you solder everything with the same density of solder that melts at exactly the same temperature, there's a solid chance that when you're doing, you've got 5 joints on your piece. You do joints 1 and 2 with easy solder. Now you're doing joints 3, 4, and 5 with easy solder. There's a solid chance that the heat's going to conduct through your metal, and whatever you did on joints 1 and 2 is going to go sproing. That's usually when the bad words get said. Like
on this street?
Schnikes and oops.
Yes, those are the words.
Those are totally the words. So what we do is we start with a higher melting point of solder, a higher density of solder for our first few joints, and then we work down. So we're going to be using medium solder, which I believe is like 70% silver, and then we're going to be using easy solder, which I believe is 65% silver. So the less silver there is in the solder, the lower the melting temperature. So I'm going to be joining this together with my medium solder. So I'm going to grab my soldering board, which is nasty and crunchy, I know, please don't judge.
This is just what they look like after you use them once.
Yeah. Okay, so there's my solder board, and my joint is, I need a pointy thing. So my joint is right there. There. Pointing right at it. You can probably see it now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flux that joint. I'm going to grab some of my medium solder. I'm going to cut that. I'm going to put it underneath my joint. So if I want my flux, I would be here. I do need to make sure it's sitting somewhere on my solder board where I can actually rest it on the solder. So like there is good. So this is liquid flux. I have long been a devotee of paste flux. I still like my paste flux, but I will say if you're doing delicate things, which this isn't necessarily, but things like filigree and such, the liquid solder is a lot better at not, just murdering your design once you're trying to place it. So I've got a nice small piece that's actually way more than I need of solder, and I'm going to take and I'm going to apparently throw no, I threw something else into my bag. I don't know what. Who knows? So I'm going to take that piece of solder and I'm going to place it underneath my joint. Now there are various ways you can do this. If I were just doing this on my own, I'd probably pick transfer it, which is a little bit more complicated. This is kind of the simplest way to do it, and also it gives you a visual cue as to when your solder has flowed, because your solder is currently kind of propping up your piece, and so when it flows, your piece is going to go from an angle to being flat. So that's a good visual cue if you have kind of difficulty sometimes seeing when your solder is actually flowing. So now I'm going to turn on my torch. Oh, I bet it's all of the igniters on my torches have crapped out, so we're going old school with a lighter. Okay, so I've got my torch, and I want to make sure that I've got something in my hand that I can use to poke or prod if I need to, so that's going to be my tweezers. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to heat this whole thing with my torch. I'm just going to go in slow and steady around it all. I'm going to make sure it gets all nice and warm. And then once it gets all warm, I'm going to focus on that joint, and you're going to see that solder pull up and into your joint. And it didn't drop down like I wanted it to, but you can see that my joint is, in fact, soldered closed, I think. Come on. So yes, so it is soldered together. So now I'm going to let this cool for a minute, because the next thing I need to do is form it around my stone. So one of the best tricks for quick cooling, if like me you can't seem to remember to bring a cup of quench water out, is to just put it on a steel block, and the steel block will leach the heat away from it pretty quickly. So once it's cool enough to touch, then I'm going to form it around my stone so that I get a nice, good, ooh, did I make you too small? Come back here. And a nice, good fit. I may have made you too small. Oh, that's unfortunate. It's not going to fit on there. Let's see. I still have faith that it will. No, it's not too small. Fine. It'll be fine. Don't worry about it. No, it's definitely not too small. It's actually verging on too big, frankly. Alright, so there we go. So now that's all set around my stone. And see, I've got these kind of gaps here that I really don't like, so I'm going to attempt to make those go away by rolling it on a steel block to see if I can kind of form it a little bit better to my stone. Because this bezel wire is stiff as the dickens.
Light is better, stick is wood.
Something like that. Oh, and now there's something in my eye. You really shouldn't touch your eye after you've been touching solder, but that was very abrupt and uncomfortable. Sometimes percussive force is needed. Larimar is a pretty hard stone, so I can do this really without too much thought that I'm going to damage my stone. Okay, so there we go. So that is fit around our stone. Now what we're going to do is, okay, so this is the stepped bezel portion. Now we're going to do the embellished portion. And so what I'm just going to do is I'm going to grab some soldered rings. I've got 5mm sterling silver soldered rings, and I need to find sort of a flattish spot on my board, which is harder than it sounds. I'm going to put these, oof. So I'm just going to do 3. The one on the example photo on the internet has 5, but I think 3 is better suited for this particular shape of stone. So I'm going to lay those out, and what's going to happen is they're going to get soldered onto this frame. So they need to line up to where this frame is, which means that they need to do some definite moving. Okay. Alright, I think that will work just fine. And then I need 2 for attachments. Okay, so that's my layout. Now I'm going to go ahead and just pick up carefully in my frame, try not to disturb any of those babies. And I'm going to flux all of them, and then I'm going to sweat a piece of solder onto each of these rings. Sweating the solder means that I'm going to take the solder, and now I'm going to switch to my easy solder. So I'm going to cut 5 pieces. So sweating the solder means that basically I'm going to melt the solder onto my rings, and then I'm going to turn off my torch. I'm going to set my frame on top of the rings with the solder melted on them, and then I'm going to heat the whole construction until that solder reflows and bonds everything together. So the positioning of the solder is always a pain, which is why I'm mostly a pick transfer girl, but you want it to be on top, like that went. I swear. Ugh, okay. I gave up. I'm pick transferring these. I just need to find a solder pick. So y'all do get to see pick transfer after all. Once again, assuming I can find a solder pick. So pick transfer, which is my preferred method of solder transfer, is where you take your solder pick and you actually use that to scoop up your solder and move it to its new home. The reason that I like pick transfer is because I get extremely frustrated when solder falls off of, you know, where I've put it. And so if you're pick transferring it, it automatically will stay. So I've got my frame set aside. Now I'm gonna sweat solder onto my 5 rings. They're not 5 golden rings, they're 5 silver rings.
No.
And I use soldered rings. It's a good cheat. You don't have to think so much about where the joint is then if you're using rings that are already pre-soldered. You could do this with jump rings, but you would want to make sure that the joints would get soldered closed during this process. Okay, so first I'm going to just kind of burn away some of the flux. Then I'm going to go down here to my little guys, which you can't really see, but that's okay. I'm going to heat one up, scoop it up on my pick, so now I have a nice little solder ball on my pick, and I'm just going to take it to my first, get back on there, my first ring, and just touch it there, and so it flowed on my ring. So I'm going to do that with all 5 of these. And so I'm looking for kind of the top part of them is where I want to sweat my solder, because I'm going to be that's where I'm going to be putting my frame. So you just want to, oh no, see what happened? See what happened there? The solder board cracked a little bit, and it totally flipped that guy right out of position. So before we do the next step, we have to put him back where he goes. So let's see. I mean, it is too early in the year to have 12 Days of Christmas references. It's true. That was not the one I was supposed to do. This is the one I was supposed to do. But sometimes I just can't help myself. I mean, I hate Christmas as much as the next Scrooge, but sometimes you just can't not, because the reference is just so there. Oh my gosh, you have it? Well, I also haven't started Christmas shopping, because I don't usually do that till like December 20th. Okay, so now we're going to take our frame, and I want to put this gently down on top of these rings and make sure that everything is still where I need it to be. And wonder of wonders, it actually is. I'm impressed. Not with myself, just with the universe. Okay, so now we're going to heat this whole thing, and what I want to see is I want to see the solder on each of these rings flow and bind it to my frame. That may or may not happen on my first pass, so let's see how I do. Okay, that one's on. I think he's on. Alright, so let's see how it goes. Yep. So it's stuck like that. That is flux residue holding it to the board. So we're just going to gently heat it and kind of poke at it until it comes up. Okay, so that's what I was trying to avoid, those big chunks of solder board. And it looks like 2 did not solder on. So I'm just going to pop this back down. And I'm going to try and apply a little bit of pressure so that I'm sure that those 2 have good contact with my frame. I'm just going to give that another try. See, it looks like we have success, but I think that this may be a false positive. I don't know that those are really on there. So I'm going to cool that down, and I'm going to try and pop them off with my fingers, because sometimes the flux residue by itself will hold your rings on or your whatever on, and it's not actually soldered. It's just on there with the flux residue. As soon as you subject it to any kind of cleaning, whether that be pickling or, you know, wire brushing or ultrasonic, anything, they'll just pop right off. So we want to make sure that they are really and truly soldered on before we conclude this project. That's still hot. Never mind. We're going to take a minute and let that cool down a little bit more. Just a little bit. Just a little bit. So tomorrow is Freeform Saturday, and I haven't quite decided what I'm going to do. I will probably decide about 5 minutes before stream. And then I do have an announcement about streaming starting next week. We are pushing back the start time of all of our streams to 6:30 instead of 6 p.m. So we will be on basically the same time we're always on, except that will be our scheduled time instead of just the time that we're, you know, scrambling to try and get to. So that's going to start next week. All of our streams, tutorials are going to start at 6:30 p.m. Sale starts at 6:30 p.m. Zoom and Freeform start at 6:30 p.m. This is just because it's really helpful for Heather and I to be able to do the closing duties in the store before we get on stream rather than after, and also because sometimes we do have lingering clients who don't even leave until 6:30. So it's just going to help kind of decrease both of our general stress levels. Okay, see, that one came right off. That one came right off. So the answer is no, I did not successfully fix that problem. So in this instance, what we're going to do is we're going to first of all take a breath, and we're going to try again. But we are going to flux our frame, and we're going to flux our rings, and we might add a little bit more solder as well. So let's see what we're going to do here. Okay. I feel like there's plenty of solder on here, but I might add a little bit more anyway. But I'm definitely going to flux them, and I'm going to flux this because sometimes the problem is just that the silver is dirty and it doesn't want to cooperate.
Flux this thing in particular.
Huh?
Flux this thing in particular.
Yes. And I am going to grab 2 more pieces of solder, and I am going to put 2 new pieces of solder on there just because it can't hurt. So now I'm going to, okay, so that's a whole lot of nothing in the camera. That's just amazingly helpful, right? So I've got my rings. There we go. I've got my rings there, got my frame there. So I'm going to start by putting 2 more pieces of solder onto my rings. And then I'm going to position this one more time on top of those rings. Ideally, I want them mostly equidistant. Alright, let's see how this goes. Alright, those are good connections. I actually saw the solder flow in those instances and attach itself to the, oh dear. Well, now that I'm trying to melt my camera cable, that's exciting. So I'm gonna let that cool for a minute, and I think everything is actually on there. Patience, that's funny. We don't do patience on this stream.
I've heard of that.
I've heard of it. Don't know what it is personally. No, Alice is actually completely right. Patience is one of the key things when you're soldering. Patience and knowledge. Like knowledge of how it's supposed to work, and patience for when it doesn't do that. Alright, so are you...
Because just applying more fire is not always the answer.
No, it's very rarely is it the answer, actually, because then things melt.
As long as it's not cameras.
No, not again. Only one of those so far. Okay, so there we go. That's my... Hey, Allison, turn on the hand cam. There we go. Alright, so there we go. That's my setting. So I've got my 2 attachment points here and here. And then I'm going to hang some cool something from the bottom here. I think I have some Larimar beads that I can hang from the bottom, which is going to be really fun. And then once again, this stone is way too tall for this bezel, okay? Way too tall. So I am going to cheat, and I'm going to glue this stone in here, but first I'm going to tumble this so it gets nice and shiny. Actually, maybe that's what I will do tomorrow night, as I'll finish this pendant on freeform. I will wire wrap my dangles and put it on a chain. So there we go. That's our freeform project. And then next week, again, streams are going to be starting at 6:30 p.m. instead of 6 p.m. And Heather will be streaming again on Wednesday because I have a memorial service to go to. I believe she's going to do basic square wire wrapped bangles. Need to double check that with her, but she just went into the owls. And I know this is a really pretty piece of Larimar, and I lucked into this as part of a donation. It is a gorgeous piece. Like, this is a really high quality piece of Larimar, and I am so happy to have it. And my client who requested a Larimar pendant, I think is going to be even more happy to have it. So yeah, okay, so next week, stream starting at 6:30. I believe Heather's doing basic wire wrapped, square wire wrapped bangles on Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. We will be having the podcast Wednesday night. I haven't picked a gem yet, but I will. And then Thursday's going to be a sale, of course. Friday's going to be a Fire Friday, so I need to come up with a new Fire Friday project. And then next week, Saturday, is going to be Zoom, which again will be starting at 6:30. Well, I have plenty of stones, Alice, but if you want to donate a stone to a tutorial so that I will set it for you, you can definitely do that. Okay, so that went a lot faster than I would have expected. Probably partly because I didn't set the stone. So I will go ahead and I will finish this on stream tomorrow night for freeform. I will actually put the stone in there, I'll put the wire wrap dangles in, and I will attach it to a chain. But everything is firmly connected. I've tested everything. Some people are really scared about testing things like this because they're afraid it's going to pop off. And what I always say is, if it's going to pop off, now is the time. Now is when you want it to come off, because you've got everything out, you've got everything right here to fix it. The stone's not in there yet. You don't have to worry about pulling it. Like, this is the optimal time for something on your piece to break or go wrong. If you... Yay! Yay, Yunkeo boy! Yes, tomorrow night, so 6 o'clock tomorrow night is freeform, so I will be finishing up this piece, and yes, and I'll finish it tomorrow night, and so I will see you back on this channel for one last time, twitch.tv/beadingdream at 6 p.m. Central Time tomorrow evening, and then we will go to 6:30 for tutorials starting next week. And don't forget, we are always soldering on Fridays. It's Fire Friday. So I'm going to come up with some kind of fun and cool soldering thing for you for next week. I'm going to do something new. I've been doing a lot of reruns because I've been sick. So something new and exciting is going to be fun. So it was a quick tutorial this evening, but we'll finish it up tomorrow night. And I hope everyone has a good evening, and I will see you all back on this channel, twitch.tv/Beading Dream, tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. for the conclusion of this necklace. Thanks so much, everybody, and have a great night. Bye!